Hello, my dear students. Welcome back. Now, are you getting a little worried about the Russian Revolution chapter? Please don't be. Just think of it less like some boring old history lesson and more like a blockbuster movie. It's got everything, drama, action, and these huge ideas that change the entire world. And you know it's super important for your exams, so let's just crack it together in the next few minutes. How does that sound?
All right, Chalo Bacho, here is our game plan for today. We're going to quickly go through these 6 stages. We'll look at what started it all, how the revolution actually happened, and then, what it meant for the rest of the world. Just stick with me, and I promise, by the end of this, you'll have all the key points you need for your exam. Ready? Let's go.
Okay, first things first, let's set the scene. You have to ask, right? Why was Russia just so ready for a massive change? What was going on? What were the big ideas and, the big problems that were just bubbling under the surface? Now listen up, because this is a classic 2-mark question right here. You absolutely have to know the difference between these 3 groups. So back then in Russia, you kind of had 3 main, let's call them teams, with different ideas. First up, the liberals. They wanted change, sure, but they were a bit picky. They wanted a parliament, but thought only men with property should get to vote. Then you had the radicals. Wow, these guys were all in. They wanted a government based on what the majority wanted, and they even supported women's right to vote. And finally, you have the conservatives. They were the no change please group, totally loyal to the Tsar. But even they had to admit, deep down, that some slow change had to happen. And this picture right here tells you everything you need to know about why people were so angry. Just look at that. It's a workers' dormitory, what they called a bunker. Can you even imagine? People were just crammed in there, working these crazy long hours, like 12, even 15 hours a day, for almost no money. I mean, this wasn't just a hard life. It was absolutely unbearable. And all this suffering, this was the fuel, the petrol, for the fire of revolution. So, into this whole mess comes this powerful new idea, and it spreads like wildfire. It's called socialism. The socialists basically looked at everything and said, you know what the real problem is? It's that a handful of rich people own all the factories and the land. So they proposed a huge what if. What if, instead of private individuals, society as a whole owned and controlled all that stuff, all the property, for the benefit of everyone? Then all that wealth could be shared. Now you can imagine, for the poor, for the suffering workers, this idea sounded pretty amazing. All right, so we've got the ingredients, right? We have very unhappy people, and we have this really powerful new idea. So what happens when you mix them together? Well, let's see how all of that anger that was just simmering under the surface finally boils over. The revolution is about to begin. You can think of the 1905 revolution as kind of like a movie trailer, a dress rehearsal for the main event that was coming in 1917. And it all kicked off with this absolutely tragic incident called Bloody Sunday. Just look at the timeline here. Prices were already rising, wages were falling, and then in January, a group of workers went to the Tsar's palace to peacefully ask for help, and the police just opened fire on them. Over 100 people were killed. I mean, can you believe it? The whole country was in shock. This led to strikes everywhere, and it actually forced the Tsar to create a parliament called the Duma. But honestly, it was too little and it was way too late. So if 1905 was the spark, then World War I, that was the dynamite that blew everything up. Just look at these numbers. They are staggering. The war was an absolute catastrophe for Russia. We're talking more than 7 million casualties by 1917, 3 million refugees because the army was destroying crops and buildings as it retreated. Industries were just shutting down, and the worst part? There was no food. Bread and flour were so hard to find that people were rioting at bread shops. And who did everyone blame? The Tsar's government, of course. The people had just had enough. They had reached their breaking point. Okay, now we get to the main event. The year 1917. The year that didn't just have 1, but 2 revolutions that would change Russia and honestly, the whole world forever. So, the first revolution hits in February, and the amazing thing is, this one wasn't planned by anyone. It was just this spontaneous explosion. It all started with women workers striking because of food shortages in Petrograd. But then, as you can see, everyone else joined in. And here's the absolute game changer. The government called in the army, but the soldiers refused to fire on the protesters. That was it. With no army to back him up, the Tsar was told he had to step down. And just like that, poof, 300 years of monarchy was over. And right into the middle of all this chaos walks this man, Vladimir Lenin. Now, he's the leader of this really radical group called the Bolsheviks.
He'd been exiled from Russia for his ideas, but now that the Tsar was gone, he came back. And he wasn't just showing up to see what was happening. Oh no, he came back with a very clear plan.
Okay, Butcho, get your highlighters out because this is a very, very important exam topic, Lenin's April Theses. It's so simple, but so powerful. He came back and made 3 promises that were basically everything the people were desperate for. First, he promised peace, an end to that terrible war. Second, land. Give the land from the nobles to the peasants. And third, bread. Nationalize the banks to solve the food shortages. Just remember those 3 words. Peace, land, bread. It was an absolutely genius slogan, and it got him a ton of support.
And all of that leads us to the second revolution of the year, in October. Now, you have to understand the difference. If the February Revolution was like a wild, spontaneous protest, the October Revolution was a carefully planned seizure of power, a proper operation. Look at the steps here. Lenin convinced his Bolshevik party that it was time to grab power, and they did. On October 24th, troops loyal to them just went out, seized government offices, arrested ministers, and took over the Winter Palace. It was fast, it was organized, it was a takeover. So there you have it. The Bolsheviks are in power. The big question is, now what? What did they actually do with that power? How did Russia change? Let's take a look at how they started building a brand new socialist state. And they did not waste any time. The Bolsheviks immediately started making huge changes, putting their socialist ideas into practice right away. I mean, look at this list. Most industries and banks were nationalized. Poof, government control. Land was declared social property, and they basically told the peasants, go on, take the nobles' land. They even banned all those old, fancy titles like Duke and Prince. They were literally taking the old Russia apart, piece by piece. But a change this massive is never going to be peaceful. And it wasn't. It led to a brutal, terrible civil war that lasted from 1918 to 1920. So you had the Reds, that's the Bolsheviks, fighting to hold on to power. And against them, you had the Whites. These were people who supported the Tsar, and they were getting help from countries like Britain, France, and the USA. And then you also had the Greens, who were another group of revolutionaries with their own ideas. It was a total mess, and for 3 years, Russia was just tearing itself apart. In the end, though, the Reds, the Bolsheviks, won the war. And once they had secured their power, in December 1922, they made it official. They created a brand new country from the old Russian Empire, the USSR, which stands for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This was a huge deal because it was the formal birth of the world's very first socialist state. Okay, so after Lenin died, a new leader came to power, a man named Joseph Stalin. And his rule, well, it would change everything all over again. He was absolutely determined to make the Soviet Union a massive industrial power. But the way he went about it, it was just brutal, and it caused unbelievable suffering for millions. So one of Stalin's big ideas was something he called collectivization. See, there were still grain shortages, and he believed the problem was all the small private farms. He thought they were inefficient. So what was his solution? He decided to force all the peasants to give up their individual farms. They had to pool all their land, all their tools, into these giant state-controlled collective farms called kolkhoz. The government's idea was that this would be a much more efficient way to grow grain. And this is a really powerful way to understand what was happening. Just look at these 2 images. On one side, you've got this propaganda poster, right? It shows the state striking down the kulaks, the well-off peasants, making them look like villains. But then on the other side, you see the reality, a peasant woman being gathered to work on one of these new collective farms. It's the perfect example of what the government wanted people to believe versus what was actually happening. Now, the peasants, they hated this. They fought back hard. They saw it as the government just stealing their land and their livelihood. In fact, many protested by killing their own animals instead of handing them over to the state. But any resistance was just crushed. This quote from a peasant's letter, it's just heartbreaking. It shows you the reality. If you resisted, they took everything from you. You could be deported, sent to exile, or worse. And the result of all this? It wasn't more food. The result was one of the worst famines in human history. All the chaos from collectivization caused food production to just collapse. The number is just, it's hard to even imagine. Over 4 million people died of starvation. So for your exam, please remember this. Don't stress about the exact number, but remember the main point. Stalin's policy was a disaster that led to this terrible famine. The human cost was just immense. Okay, last section. let's zoom out and look at the global legacy. Because what happened in Russia didn't just stay in Russia. No way. It had this huge ripple effect all across the world, including, yes, right here in India.
I mean, think about it. The world's first socialist state. It was a huge, huge deal. It inspired people everywhere. Communist parties started popping up in other countries. And for people in colonies fighting for freedom, it was a huge source of inspiration. Here in India, for example, many of our own great leaders, people like Jawaharlal Nehru and writers like Rabindranath Tagore, were watching what was happening in the Soviet Union very, very closely.
So the impact of the revolution is, well, it's complicated. It's got two sides. On the one hand, yes, it put socialism on the global map. It gave hope to millions who are fighting to be free. But on the other hand, as time went on, the world also started to see the darker side. Yes, the USSR became a superpower, but it came at a terrible price. It was a country where its own people were denied basic freedoms.
So, as you get ready for your exams, here's the big question I want you to think about. It's perfect for a conclusion to a long answer. Can a revolution's amazing ideals, ideas of equality and justice for all, can they actually survive when the methods used to achieve them become so repressive and cruel? That's really the central puzzle of the whole Russian Revolution. And that's it. That's our quick revision done. I really hope this helped you get all the main points straight in your head. All the very best for your exams. You're going to do great.